Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Yeah. Excited about doing Torah study with you guys. I think it's kind of fun doing the last day of Sukkot, the 8th day, and so in light of that, I know Tom's going to be teaching today, right? And so I was really wanting to go through a journey together through the scriptures from the Torah through the revelation of scriptures related to the 8th day, and just to see what scriptures can teach us, what the Lord is wanting to tell us about the 8th day. And so, as we go through that, I wanted us to keep kind of two questions in our minds to think about. One is, what is God trying to teach Israel and the followers of God of Israel through the scriptures about the 8th day? What is God trying to communicate to us the 8th day? And so today's the 8th day celebration, so it's the 8th day of Sukkot. So we'll kind of go through the scriptures of what the Bible has to say about that. And the other question in light of the last Torah study, which I got to watch, is what is the 8th day? How does that relate to the unseen realm and what God is doing in light of Tom's teaching last Torah study about the unseen realm? So I think it'll be good to kind of think about that in light of those. So, sound good?
Sounds good.
Would you repeat that second question again?
So last Torah study, Tom taught about the unseen realm, so the Michael Heiser sort of stuff.
Okay.
And so just in light of that, what does the 8th day, how does that relate to what is the battle that's going on against Israel?
Okay.
Matt, will you pray for us?
Yes. Yes. So our Father and King, we thank you for your Shabbat. Thank you for your Torah and your scriptures that you preserve through your people Israel, and through your church as well, preserve these scriptures. So we thank you, Father, for that. We ask for your wisdom and your insight from your word today, that we would hear what you are speaking to Israel and to the nations through your word about your 8th day. I ask that you just fill us with your spirit today, wisdom and revelation, to see what you are saying. In the name of Yeshua. Amen. All right. So when you hear the term 8th day, what do you think of the 8th day? Just the term 8th day. Does anything kind of ring a bell about what maybe that relates to?
Well, Asher says it has to do with the millennial reign.
Right. Kind of that Sukkot and then the Moedim, that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think anew.
Anew? Mm-hmm. What do you think of new?
Well, 7 days creation, and then the 8th day is a new, starting over. You know, new beginning, new whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's always the way I think of the 8, or 8 is kind of like new.
Absolutely, yeah.
Completed is like right before, so after completion comes new.
Right. Absolutely, that's what I thought
That's
of
what
too.
my brain wants.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I thought of too, is that the creation, and the 7 days, and then the new day. Even looking back at Genesis 1 again, which we'll be reading soon, which is starting, it's just like, God floating over the surface of the waters, and the chaos and the darkness. And then by the end of 7 days, he had created all those things. And each day had to do with what God was doing. Right? And so the 8th day, I think, about the same thing. It's that new, kind of beginning of the new week. What is God doing in this creation order on the 8th day? So, kind of starting back there. So, the creation part in our minds. So let's first jump into the actual Torah portion. So I'm going to go to Deuteronomy. We'll start at 15. Would someone read 15:1 through 11? throw it first? Or you read?
Yeah, I can go. Right. At the end of every 7 years, you shall grant a release of debts. And this is a form of the release. Every creditor who has lent anything to his neighbor shall release it. He shall not require it of his neighbor or his brother, because it is called the Lord's release. Of a foreign you may require it, but you shall give up your claim to what is owed by your brother, except when there might be no poor among you. For the Lord is greatly bless you in for the Lord is greatly bless you in the land which the Lord your God is giving you to possess as inheritance. Only if you carefully obey the voice of the Lord your God to absorb with care all these commandments which I command you today. For the Lord your God will bless you just as he promised you. You shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow. You shall reign over many nations, but they shall not reign over you. If there is among you poor men of your brethren within any of the gates in your land which the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart, nor shut your hand from your poor brother. But you shall open your hand wide to him, and willingly lend him sufficient for his need. Whatever he needs, whatever he needs. Beware lest there be a wicked thought in your heart, saying the 7th year, the year of release, is at hand, and your eye be evil against your poor brother, and you give him nothing, and he cry out to the Lord against you, and it becomes sin among you. You should surely give to him, and your heart should be grieved when you give to him, because for this thing the Lord your God will bless you in all your works and in all which you put your hand. For the poor will never cease from the land. Therefore I command you, saying, you shall open your hand wide to your brother, to your poor and your needy in your land. If your brother, a Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman, is sold to you.
Just to 11, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no.
15.
Oh, sorry, no.
No, it's
just
chapter
11.
15.
Yeah, chapter 15. So that's good. No, thank you.
It was 15 somewhere. Though.
Yeah. It was 15 something. That was a lot of verses, so I thank you for reading. First thing, does anyone recognize a quote that Yeshua has from this passage? Anyone recognize a Yeshua quote in this passage? He quotes, kind of paraphrases maybe, but he's referencing this.
You'll always have a poor.
You always have, yeah, exactly. You always have the poor among you. So this is the context in which that's given, so I think that's fascinating. He says there will always be the poor among you. He's referencing this passage. Anybody else notice another earlier on talking about the poor, whether they would be in the land or not?
Well, it says, however, there should be no poor among you.
Yes. Poor among you, because I know your God is going to bless you. Yet then later it says, there will always be poor in the land. Yeah. What do you think he's saying in that, in the same thing?
But he knew that they weren't gonna do what he told them to do.
Yeah, we're not doing our part.
Maybe he's talking about a future day
Where there,
where there won't be.
yeah, some translations, so TLB says, however, there should be no poor among you.
Oh, gotcha.
For Adonai will surely bless you in the land Adonai your God is giving you as an inheritance to possess. And then it said, the next verse it says, if you would be careful to listen to the voice of Adonai and be careful to do all his mitzvah, I'm commanding you today. So I think, like, if the Israelites were and we were careful to obey, there wouldn't be the poor among us. But I think that's interesting that he said there will always be poor among you later on.
Because we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing.
That there is that reality of, in this age, that the poor will always be there. And so that's why, because if that first verse, that verse 4 was true, would you need that next part? The release of debt.
No, because there wouldn't be debt, if there was.
There's no poor. Yeah. So he set up a system to which to redeem the nation every 7 years from its sinfulness and not obeying his mitzvah.
That was kind.
Yeah. 7-year turnaround, that's pretty good, for a nation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts about that juxtaposition? Or about the poor in here?
It's a command in verse 11 to care for the poor. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting progression because it goes from there should be no poor to if there is poor to you will always have the poor. And it's the interesting thing of like just what stuck out to me just now is just that there should be no poor among you if you're obedient, you do what God says, right? But we all know that's never going to happen because humanity is not good at being obedient to God. And so then it's like, but you're going to have poor, so then you have to care for them. It's like you're still like you're not like it doesn't let you off the hook or something. I don't know quite. I haven't thought that all the way through, but it's like
I like that.
it's like you shouldn't have the poor, but since you do, you have to care for them. So it's like,
or even like, let's say you are following the Lord's commandments, Emma. You're still not off the hook for taking care of the poor because I'm not following the Lord's commandments.
Or they weren't following the
Or
Lord.
they weren't. Like,
Yeah.
so like we have this responsibility
yeah,
regardless
it's
to
the
help
communal.
the poor. Yeah, it's like very
communal and
corporate,
individual.
familial perspective, not just this individual, I'm following the Lord, so I'm good. You
He's
know?
blessing me, so
Right.
what's wrong with you? Yeah.
Well, yeah, and then you'd have to be really careful, like in this day and age, getting on that judgy type of thing, like when you go to a country that's really poor, so then you just decide, okay, well, that's because all of them are sinners and the curse of the Lord is on that land, you know, I mean. He set up a system to try to help people out on this, which is, to me, remarkable, like that 7-year turnaround, like he's trying to give you a chance that this isn't your life sentence to be this way. But then you do look at places and nations where it's like that from birth to death. I mean, they just never get out from underneath that.
Yeah, because like some judgment can be, you can kind of get frustrated and write off places.
Yeah.
But God is always seeking to redeem.
Yeah.
And that's the role of the body is to, in the callings that he has in each of our lives, to go and help redeem people out of slavery, to sin, to death, to debt.
But let's say they did everything right, followed all the commands. There are still foreigners living among them that the rules didn't apply to. So they might be enslaving each other in debt, but living in the land. And the Israelites are still to apply these rules to the poor. Again, that were no fault of the Israelites.
Interesting. Yeah. And they're supposed to take care of the poor, the widow, the foreigner. Though the foreigner those outside the covenant didn't have the same rights, in the sense that you didn't have to cancel the debts, which is interesting. But you still had to take care of them. There was still an expectation of not letting people doing what to keep them.
he's also making it a heart issue because he's saying, and your eye is evil against your poor and you give him nothing. He's talking about our heart, how we give, if we give begrudgingly or if we desire to give.
Right.
So it's about a heart, it's about our heart. It always seems to be that.
Reflects
Yeah,
and reveals what's in our hearts. Yeah.
right.
And it's interesting because it's very practical because you have the system in place that every 7 years the debts get canceled and you're doing well and so you're lending to people. That would make sense that come the year 6 you're like, I don't know if this guy's gonna get it back to me in the next year before it cancels. Like that's a natural, logical reaction, right? But he says to the poor, which there is a distinction there, right? To to someone who's well off who just wants to borrow money so that it gets canceled, it's not allowing that, right? But to the poor, that you should not withhold, even if the debt canceling is coming. So it's interesting.
Good.
And one interesting practical thing that affects our lives here in the U.S., which is actually fairly unique to the United States, is our bankruptcy laws, which are actually based off this passage that they last 7 years, your bankruptcy, after you go through bankruptcy. So it's actually mirrored off the Torah's example of how to redeem someone out of financial debt.
Mhm.
And so, which I think is amazing. And it's actually very unique even in the West, developed West. Most other countries don't have that. Like I've heard of Spain, for one, you foreclose or you always have to pay back your debt, even if the bank takes your house and they can't sell it to make the money back, you still owe them the difference. There's no way out of it.
So it's a good example of that combats the narrative on how we are like institutionally a society of slavery.
Right.
Actually, this law flies in the face of that. Unlike any other nation in the world. So it's kind of
And it comes out-
ironic right now.
Right.
In light of part of the agenda, if you will, we have. This is huge. I mean, this is more serious in some sense because you could outlaw slavery, like black slavery, but to have law, financial laws, that's even like awesome.
Right.
In
That's only
addition
to
to-
reign from financial slavery.
Right.
Because if you are always indebted to somebody, then you are enslaved.
Exactly.
It's good to connect that to slavery.
This is slavery, right? It's
Right.
debtor slavery.
Debtor
clearly.
slavery. Yeah.
Well, is it though? Like 5,000 years ago, there was no Walmart. You can just go walk in and apply for a job. Like that was the only way for them to work, right? There was men in power and.
Oh, we're talking about slavery?
Yeah, well, I think
Oh.
we had a class about it, like 6 months ago,
Mhm.
that I really enjoyed. But yeah, I want to go back to what Debbie said. I think it was so beautiful. Like you can see just like the heart of the Lord there. Like, he knows that people struggle and you go and you need to enslave yourself to a certain place in order to feed your family. And you can just see your heart that he goes and say, hey, like, just, I love the wording, like, willingly, land, right? Like, do it wholeheartedly, like, because this is who we are, this is who God wants us to be, just like, I don't know.
Yeah. For those of us who grew up in the church or experienced that way, it tells us too that God was always concerned about the heart. It's a narrative, at least for me growing up, was that the heart, Yeshua, all his teachings were about the heart, and that was a new thing. But Yeshua is really, him and the Father are one. Like, the Father was always about the heart as well as the actions. And Yeshua is the same way. I mean, he highlighted, amplified it, made it, but it's again that, like you guys are saying, it's that God is wanting to redeem our hearts too. Because it's not just the slavery of the debtor, but it's the slavery of the lender to sin he wants to redeem. And so it's not just those individual slavery, but the slavery in our hearts to greed. So let's jump to Deuteronomy 16 and get to Sukkot here. He talks about the fall festivals. In Deuteronomy 16, 13 through 15, talks about Sukkot. Someone read those 3 verses for me?
I can. You are to keep the feast of Sukkot for 7 days after gathering in the produce from your threshing floor and winepress. So you will rejoice in your feast, you, your son and daughter, slave and maid, Levite and outsider, orphan and widow within your gates. 7 days you will feast to Adonai your God in the place he chooses, because Adonai your God will bless you in all your produce and in all the work of your hand, and you will be completely filled with joy.
That sounds nice, huh? So what, in verse 14 talks about all the different people who will rejoice, your son, your daughter, your slave, your maid, the Levite, the outsider, foreigner, the orphan and the widow. Why would they be rejoicing in this time? Especially the slave, or the orphan and the widow. Yeah, it seems to be an orphan and a widow, especially back then, it's pretty rough. Why would they be rejoicing?
Because everybody gets to be a part of the feast.
Yeah. So they're all
gathered in.
Plenty of food.
Plenty of food. It's a big deal. Especially then. Food was a lot harder to come by.
And meat.
And meat, which is a rarity. What else, in light of what we just talked about, would they be celebrating?
With the prophetic look of Ezekiel 14. Am I quoting Ezekiel 14? Is that right? The millennium, when everyone gathers in
yes.
Jerusalem for the feast.
So does
Is
that
Ezekiel 14?
prophetic sign? Yeah, I don't know, I don't remember.
Well, he asked them to remember that they're not slaves in Egypt anymore.
Right.
That's something to
Slavery.
rejoice about.
Yeah. Well, we just talked about the cancellation of debts too.
Zechariah
And the free,
14. Zechariah 14.
And the part we didn't read, which right after, was about the releasing the slaves too. So, I mean, every year they celebrate. They're also known when they come that this is, so when, do you guys remember, when are the slaves released and is the debt canceled? In the Moedim, like during the, when does that happen? Do you remember?
Year of Jubilee?
So, yeah, the year of Jubilee is one, but when does the actual, what day?
And
does
what
the-
time of year?
Yeah, what day does the release happen?
During Sukkot? Are you talking
Right
about-
before Sukkot, actually. Yeah.
Yom Kippur.
Yom Kippur. It's the last shofar blast. There's a shofar blast on Yom Kippur, and that's when the debts are forgiven and the slaves are set free.
Cool.
And then they have a few days to prepare and then celebrate. I mean, you just got out of slavery. You just got your debts canceled. Yeah, I mean, what else would you do, right? You go party, right? I mean, it's like you gotta celebrate the freedom. So that's not every year, right? It's every 7 years. But you know, as a slave, you just, you're going through this hard time, famine had come through, you sold yourself to this family who was doing well still. You know you're gonna work for free, but every time Sukkot comes around, you get extra food, but you also know this is the time of year where I will be free. And every year you remember that.
So it gives you like a hope.
Yeah, 1 year closer.
Yeah.
I like that.
You're not just trying to remember in your head, you experience it every year. And you're talking with your other friends who may be slaves, because of a similar situation or whatever happened.
So every year, some people would be set free.
No.
Just, so
Every 7 years.
every 7 years, everybody is set free.
Yes.
Regardless of when they became a slave.
Right,
So
exactly.
that was-
Or collected the debt.
So like, maybe you were only a slave for 5 years, but
Right.
if it's on,
Yes,
so
exactly.
it's
Or
kind
3
of the
or-
same as when he talks about the workers and
Yeah.
they all
Yes.
said they would agree to do this for a denarii or whatever.
Mhm.
Ah,
Same
I
thing.
just see that.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And so the Sukkot then is a reminder of that coming day.
Mhm.
So there's part of that too, like you'd feel that anticipation, right? Which
Yeah.
is the Lord's grand anticipation of redemption of the world too. So it's kind of beautiful how
Mhm.
it all comes together in this day. Anyone notice out of those 3 verses something that's missing in light of this being the 8th day Torah portion?
It doesn't talk about the 8th day.
It doesn't talk about the 8th day, which is interesting. Because it does talk about the 8th day of the Torah, right? And we'll look at those passages. But why do you think they included this, even though it didn't talk about the 8th day? What?
I have some opinions.
Gives opinions, yeah, that's all we have is opinions, so if anyone has opinions. Well, you said it, so you probably go first, everyone's waiting.
Yes, we are.
I have a lot of, I think that, I'll talk about it some in my teaching today.
You don't have to give it all
I don't really mind, but I think that it really gets, the 8th day kind of gets lumped into Sukkot.
Mm-hmm.
And really, what I'm gonna show today is like, there's a reason it's separate. It's really not 8 days, it's 7 days plus 1. So, and even, but numerous times it says very clearly, like in this passage you just read, the feast is for 7 days.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right.
Doesn't say it's for 8 days.
Mm-hmm.
It actually never says it's for 8 days.
Mm-hmm.
But it usually will have 7 days and then have, and on the 8th day do this. So there's, there's, I know that's a whole equeduct for a couple of days about it. So.
Right.
But yeah, it isn't mentioned in several places like this one.
Mm-hmm.
So
So, yeah.
we could ask why not.
Right.
Another question. This is Matt's.
Yeah, and I think for this particular one, I think is what we'll come to see more of is that in light of our conversation before this, is why are we celebrating? Why the 8th day is important? I think it's kind of clearly laid out in this Torah portion in light of the redemption of the slaves, of the debtors, and that transition from debt, or death to life, from debt to freedom, from slavery to freedom. And so I think this, even though the 8th day is not spoken about here, it's the juxtaposition is shown clearly, I think. So I think that's one reason, potentially. So let's go ahead and jump to actually Leviticus 23:33, where it actually talks about the 8th day. So 23:33 through 36. Is somebody willing to read that for me? Thank you.
Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Benai Yisrael, and say, on the 15th day of this month, 7th month, is the feast of Sukkot, for 7 days to Adonai. On the first day there is to be a holy convocation. You are to do no laborious work. For 7 days you are to bring an offering by fire to Adonai. The 8th day will be a holy convocation to you, and you are to bring an offering by fire to Adonai. It is a solemn assembly. You should do no laborious work.
So what happens on the 8th day in light of this?
Another holy convocation. The first day and the 8th day, right? Is that what it says?
So what is a holy convocation? What happens on it?
Doesn't say.
It doesn't say it here.
Well, it does say,
It does say.
bring an offering by fire.
Yeah, it doesn't make it super clear
The complete
on the
Jewish-
first day, but yeah, for the 8th day.
Stern says it's a public assembly.
Public assembly.
Also says sacred assembly here.
Yeah, I was gonna say set apart.
So there must be gathering together
Mm-hmm.
in public, not in your prayer closet, but this is actually time to come out
Mhm.
together.
Right, yeah, that's good. It's sacred, it's a holy time to be together.
Mm-hmm.
So I looked it up, and the Hebrew word means, calling together and holy, put together. And its first reference in the Torah is actually Exodus 12:16, which Exodus 12:16, or chapter 12 in Exodus, is right after the death of the firstborn. So you have all the story of the plagues, the death of the firstborn, and then 12 and 13, I think, it kind of, the narrative switches. It talks about Passover. And in there it says, on the first day of Passover, to hold a sacred assembly, and one another on the seventh day. Do not work all these days except to prepare food for everyone to eat. That is all you may do. So it's interesting. It's not, and this is Sukkot too. So I mean, this is Passover, but also that. So this is the reference, right? This is the first time it's expressed in the Torah. So there's significance to that. But so it's not a fast day. It's a sacred assembly, but it's not a fast day. You're supposed to cook food. It's the only thing you're allowed to do. So I think that was interesting. So what? So they're allowed to cook. You're coming together. So this first time you have a sacred assembly, why are they coming together? Like, think of the circumstance. What circumstance are they in, the children of Israel?
They're getting ready to leave.
Mm-hmm. Right?
And they've been spared.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Yes, they've been spared. And they're about to be delivered from slavery. Or they have been delivered from slavery and about to leave Egypt. So it's an interesting juxtaposition to the Torah portion that we just read, which is the release of slaves. And so it's this holy convocation, this celebration of deliverance. And they're still in Egypt. So they're having this holy convocation, but it's because he brought deliverance. But it wasn't just about killing the firstborn, right? In light of last Torah study, right, Tom talked about the unseen realm. So what was happening through the plagues of Egypt in light of these other Elohim, right? Not the God of gods, not the one true living God, but the other Elohim that they talked about. What was going on?
Well, one by one, those gods were being taken down. Their lack of power was being shown, and the children of Israel were learning who the one true God was.
Right, exactly. Yeah. He was defeating each one of them. They were holding the children of Israel enslaved. Because it wasn't just the physical armies of the Pharaoh, but it was the supernatural power of these small e Elohim that were holding the children of Israel in slavery. But he was defeating each one of them. And then the firstborn was the last one, the son of Ra, right, which was the Pharaoh. And then the holy convocation comes, where they are celebrating the deliverance from these gods.
Do you think that the word holy stuck out to me, and then solemn? Because for the first 7 days, it was 7, it was holy convocation the first day. But then it switches over to solemn assembly. I was wondering if you have any opinion on the difference between holy and solemn.
I didn't look that up to see if it was just a different translation of the same word or if it's a different word. So that's a good question.
So I looked up solemn, just the definition of that, and it says formal or dignified, not cheerful or smiling, it's very serious, characterized by deep sincerity. So thinking about even the Passover and then this last day where you're like, you're free. It's not taken lightly. Deeply think about what is happening here.
Right.
So to go to that place of deep contemplation or yeah.
Different than holy then.
Yeah,
in a way.
And the 7 days are full of joy. And so you're still eating on the solemn assembly, but you're thinking about it in a deeper, different way.
Right. Good. And holy means set apart, but also being solemn. The significance of all that freedom requires responsibility out of us. Right? Freedom isn't always easy.
Well, not to be taken lightly.
And not to be taken
lightly. This is a serious thing that God is doing for us. So.
All All right, let's jump to one more Torah portion, or place in the Torah that talks about the 8th day. It's Numbers 29.
Where?
Numbers 29, we'll start on 12. Numbers, we jump into Numbers.
Okay,
Numbers.
Number 29.
Yeah, we were in Leviticus, now we're in Numbers. So I'll read this first part, this just to help give us some context here. So this whole section is talking about, starting in verse 12, it's talking about tabernacles. We go through the whole thing because it'll just be a lot to read, but on the 15th day of the 7th month, you're to have a sacred assembly. You're not to do any of your work, you are to celebrate the feast to Adonai for 7 days. You're to offer a burnt offering by fire to Adonai as a pleasing aroma, 13 young bulls from the herd, 2 rams, 14-year-old male lambs without defect. The grain offerings of fine flour mixed with oil, 3/10 of an ephah of each of the 13, with each of the 13 bulls, 2/10 of each of the 2 rams, 1/10 with each of the 14 lambs, plus 1 male goat as a sin offering, besides the regular burnt offering with its grain and drink offering. Then it goes on 2nd day, 3rd day, 4th day, and then all the way down to verse 35, it goes to the 8th day. Someone else want to read 8th day, so 35 through 38?
On the 8th day there shall be for you an assembly. You are to do no regular work. You are to offer to Adonai a burnt offering, a fire offering, a pleasing aroma, 1 bull, 1 ram, and 7 male lambs a year old without defect, and their grain and drink offerings with the bull, ram, and lamb corresponding to their number according to the regulations, and a goat for a sin offering, besides the regular burnt offering with its grain and drink offerings. You are to prepare these for Adonai at your Moedim in addition to your vow and freewill offerings, along with your burnt offerings, grain offerings, drink offerings, and the fellowship offering. So Moses told Ben Israel all that Adonai commanded Moses.
So, and here we get a little more into the nitty-gritty of each of the days, right? So, because first, anything stand out about thinking about what they were actually doing on these days?
Lots of sacrifice.
If you read through each day, there's different numbers for each one, which is, I'm sure there's meaning to that, but I did not have time to delve into it, which is fascinating. But
If they're not supposed to do any work, I would think these sacrifices would be a lot of work.
yeah, the priests are working. Yeah,
The priests are working.
yeah. And they're often except for the sin offering, they're eating, right? So food preparations also regular work.
So
But-
no
Yeah,
ordinary
customary
just-
work.
Yeah, like your regular work, not, work is worship, so priests work. And worship on even Shabbat.
And one distinction which is interesting in all 8 days to me is that there's multiple offerings given, and then there's 1 sin offering. I feel like that was interesting that what God required, there's all 7 and 13 and all these different types of offering, but then 1 sin offering. I feel like that juxtaposition every day was an interesting one. What do you think God was trying to tell Israel and us?
I think
about
he was
that?
preparing them for what was gonna come, and there would be 1 man take on all the sins, 1 time, done. And just popped up out of that, so.
Right, yeah. Looking ahead to Yeshua. Yeah. Any other thoughts about that?
Just shows the tension of it, because they're giving all these offerings, and they're, like you said, they're gonna eat them, so like, they're basically, Tom likes to say, having barbecue and having a party for a week. But there's still this recognition of sin. It's like, they're being obedient and following the commandment, but they still have to recognize their sin. Like, it's just like this interesting juxtaposition of the tension that they live in, that we still live in it.
Right.
Of like the obedience, but we're still not perfect. We still live in a broken world. We still have to atone for sin. Like, it doesn't go away even. Like, I don't know. It's just like that interesting side by side, both at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's good. Yeah, you get the tension of those two. And I even thought too, it's interesting the amounts, like it's just so much heavier on the offerings, right? On what we're going to be eating, the part that we can partake with him. And then we got to deal with the sin. So let's do the one every day. This is a holy time. Let's make sure the sin's taken care of. But the disproportionate of it, I think, speaks to his heart too. That he really wants that to commune with us, because that's what the free will those offerings are about. We're partaking with him. It's not just about we give. When I would see, which we'll see later, actually the Psalm, when Solomon dedicates the temple, or when David moves the tabernacle, there's all these offerings, like thousands and thousands of offerings happen. It's like in a pagan world that was to appease the god, but in the Israel context, it was about communing with God, because they were eating those things, and so this was offered to God, but then we eat it as well. It's that one and like that connection piece. So he really wants that. He really wants to deal with our sin, but he really wants to be with us.
And he wants us to have barbecue.
Right.
I mean,
and bread.
Yeah.
Priestly diet.
Free.
I think it's interesting, even as you look through the different days, that each day is just a little less of the bulls, and that the lamb stays the same. And
interesting.
So you're gonna really eat a lot on the first day, and then you're not as hungry the next day because you really celebrated that first day. Anyway, and then the last day is not as much.
Right. It's
So
less than that.
it's a solemn assembly, so people are more serious, so they're not, I don't know.
It's 1:17.
Yeah. Well,
That completion.
Question, are these sacrifices for the entire nation or for every household?
I think these were priestly expectations at the temple, so for the nation.
The nation.
But then people could bring additional free will offerings. So yeah, obviously that's not enough for the millions of Israelites to eat off of.
Right.
The priests are eating those, but other people can bring their own free will offerings to So let's jump from the Torah into the writings, and let's go first to Chronicles 7:9. Second Chronicles? Yes, thank you. Second Chronicles 7:9. This whole passage is really good, so it's going to be hard not to read the whole thing. But I'll jump around a little bit. I'll read this one. So now Solomon finished praying that fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offering and the sacrifices, and the glory of Adonai filled the house. That's a great way to start a chapter. Wow. The Kohanim could not even enter the house of Adonai because the glory of Adonai filled the house of Adonai, which harkens back to Moses when Adonai fills the tabernacle and he couldn't enter it. They couldn't enter it then. So, and filling the house. And just to give the numbers, down in verse 5, King Solomon offered sacrifice of 22,000 cattle and 120,000 sheep. That's a lot. The priests were working hard that day.
Possible.
And so look, I mean, you had a lot of people to feed. So, then we'll jump down at verse 8. At that time, Solomon observed the feast for 7 days, and all of Israel with him. A great assembly from Lebo Hamath to the brook of Egypt. On the 8th day, they held a solemn assembly, for they had celebrated dedication of the altar for 7 days, and the feast for 7 days. So this is another reference to the 8th day. So what about this story kind of speaks to Sukkot and the 8th day?
What's happening at Sukkot?
Mm-hmm.
A solemn assembly.
It's not just speaking of it, it's happening on.
Yeah. And why do you think Solomon would have dedicated the temple on Sukkot? It's good.
He's kind of that forerunner of David's son.
Mm.
So there's a David's son who's going to do, because Solomon did not follow the prescribed offerings here.
Mm.
Right? 1,000 sheep.
Which his father did too.
It's kind of this little glimpse of the son of David that's coming.
Mm.
It's interesting that Sukkot was to remind Israel of how they were in the desert in tents,
Mm-hmm.
and this is making offerings and celebrating because they, quote unquote, found a resting place for the Lord, a dwelling place for the Lord.
Mm. Yeah.
It's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Because it seems like in the Torah it talks about a place that God will choose.
Mm.
There's this future place, especially in the Exodus and stuff, there's this future place where God will put his name, where he will put his character.
Mhm.
Well, this is it.
Mhm.
This is at least the starting of it.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And Solomon must get that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think he gets that.
Yeah.
He probably got it a lot more as it was happening. Because of God's response.
Right. And that's where he set his name. Yeah, he literally in fire set his name in that place.
There's a real feel of completion here on the 8th day, because it says they did this, and now the feast is for 7. It says on the 8th day they held a solemn assembly, for they had celebrated the dedication of the altar. So it's like, okay, this is a completion of what the Lord said to do.
Right. That's good. Yeah, in that solemn sense.
Solomon.
Mm. Sounds good, man. Yes. Oh, sorry. I don't know how to go from that. But no, it's good, the completion for sure. And it's interesting too, kind of what you were alluding to as well, was he's completing the work of his father. And I think that kind of harkens, like you said, to that future son of David who completes the work of his father. And we're also looking, because the father's work isn't complete yet. So we're looking forward to the completion of his work.
God promises that. He says that you won't lack a ruler to sit on this throne that he's established at Jerusalem. Later on in that chapter.
Yeah. Good. Eternal ruler, eternal son of David. Let's jump real quick to 1 Kings, which is this telling of the same story but has a little different detail. 1 Kings 8, 65, 66. So I'll read this, so just to, we'll move on to Nehemiah after this. But it says, so Solomon and all Israel with him celebrated the festival at the time. The great congregation from the entrance of Hamath to the Wadi of Egypt, before Adonai Eloheinu, 7 days and then 7 more, 14 in all. So he doubles Sukkot to dedicate the altar as well. On the 8th day, he sent the people away. They blessed the king and went to their tents, joyful and glad of heart, over all the goodness that Adonai had shown to his servant David and to his people Israel. So I think that speaks to, again, that completion of the work of the Father. And how the people walked away full of joy to their tents, to their homes. So it speaks to that again. But then, sadly, the joy doesn't stay, right? I was thinking about, you say, kind of the irony of dedicating on Sukkot is Sukkot are temporary dwellings. And the Temple of Solomon was, in the grand scheme of things, temporary. It would, because of the sin of Israel, it gets destroyed. But God's work obviously was not done. And so through Nehemiah and others, he brings them back. So let's go to Nehemiah 8. So I'm going to read the first 3 verses to give some context before we jump down to 18.
Nehemiah 8:1?
Yeah, Nehemiah 8:1 through 3.
Then all the people were brought as a single body into the plaza that was before the water gate. They said to Ezra the scribe, "Bring out the Torah scroll of Moses that Adonai had commanded Israel." Ezra the Cohen brought the Torah before the assembly, which included men and women, and all who could understand what they heard. This happened on the first day of the 7th month. So he read from it before the plaza in front of the water gate from the first light until midday in the presence of the men and women and others who could understand. And all the people listened intently to the scroll of the Torah.
Thank you. Someone remind me, I realized I didn't look at this. The first day of the 7th month is,
It's Yom Teruah, the Feast of Trumpets.
so yeah, Yom Teruah. So they start this on Yom Teruah, the beginning, the fall feast, which they haven't been celebrating by reading the Torah and relearning what God was speaking to them. And so they keep reading. The people begin to cry and weep because they realized that they had not who God is and how they had been sinning against Him and not keeping His modim. They tell him not to weep, for today is a holy day to the Lord. Go eat choice food, drink sweet drinks. Send portion to those who have nothing ready. For today is kadosh to our Lord. Do not grieve. The joy of Adonai is our strength. And then, would someone read 13 through 18? A little context here. And look for what is there anything else we learn about the 8th day through this. So, yeah, 13 through 18.
Now on the 2nd day, the heads of the fathers' houses of all the people, with the priests and Levites, were gathered to Ezra the scribe, in order to understand the words of the law. And they found written in the law, which the Lord had commanded by Moses, that the children of Israel should dwell in booths during the feast of the 7th month, and that they should announce and proclaim in all their cities and in Jerusalem, saying, "Go out to the mountain and bring olive branches, branches of oil trees, myrtle branches, palm branches, and branches of leafy trees, to make booths, as it is written." Then the people went out and brought them and made themselves booths, each one on the roof of his house, or in their courtyards, or the courts of the house of God, and in the open square of the water gate, and in the open square of the gate of Ephraim. So the whole assembly of those who had returned from captivity made booths and sat under the booths. For since the days of Joshua the son of Nun until that day, the children of Israel had not done so. And there was very...
Sorry, let's pause. I want to do that last one.
Okay.
Let's pause.
Yes.
Anyone else see the immensity of that last statement? Since the days of Joshua the son of Nun until that day, Bnei Israel had not done so. We're in Nehemiah. A lot has happened between Joshua. Does that mean even David, during the days of David, they did not do them? And Solomon? So maybe it's a bit of a, I don't know if it's like no one did it, but it's, maybe it
Maybe
needs
they didn't do it as a nation,
as a nation in its
corporately?
entirety. I mean, that just seems like a really weighty statement.
Yeah, yeah.
That no one, that they hadn't done it from, in this way at least, from Joshua to this day. I feel like I've read that before, but that just hit me this last time you were, it's like, no wonder the Lord's heart was grieved.
Yeah.
And it could be a little bit of
A hyperbole,
exaggerate, yeah, it
yeah.
could be hyperbole, I think
Right.
most likely it's hyperbole, but not, doesn't take away from the drama of the exile. But, I mean, it does say from Joshua, enough, but
Right,
it
right.
still could be exaggerated.
Yeah, yeah. Because obviously we just read those where Solomon celebrated Sukkot, and, but I don't know about the booths thing or like exactly what they were meaning, but yeah. Even if it's
That's
hyperbole,
true.
there's a point they're trying to make here of the importance of coming back to this. Sorry, now read verse 18. Thank you.
Yeah. There was very great gladness. Also day by day, from the first day until the last day, he read from the book of the law of God. And they kept the feast 7 days. And on the 8th day there was a sacred assembly according to the prescribed manner.
So anything else in here that kind of speaks to the importance of or what's going on in Sukkot or the 8th day, or anything else that stood out to you guys?
I think it's important to see that it's like you can't talk about the 8th day without talking about the 7 days. And so every time you're looking at it, it's always connected. And so I think that's important. And then we don't always get a whole lot of details on the 8th day. We get a lot of details, or at least more details about the 7th day. And I think that's also communicating some things to us. So I'm just making reference or note to that. But then it's actually, the other thing I think is important to note is that the 8th day, this is the 5th passage we've read about it that's explicit. I mean, it's like 8th day, right? So this isn't an obscure, I'm going to mention this in my teaching, but it's not an obscure reference. This isn't one of these hidden, it's referenced one time and only in Hebrew you really get it or something. It's actually in there quite a bit. So I think that's also significant. And I'll just leaving it there, but it's not a obscure, unknown deal in Scripture. And I would argue there's a whole lot of references that are not explicit, but are talking about the significance of the 8th day and connected to the 7th.
I also find it interesting that the two non-Torah, or three, I guess, but the two are telling the same story, of Solomon, now Nehemiah, when the 8th day is referenced, are both about establishment of the order of God in Israel. So in Solomon's time in the temple, the establishment of the temple order in Israel, and Jerusalem being the center, and then in Nehemiah, the reestablishment of that order are when they've referenced. It's interesting, it's connected to reestablishment in the Tanakh.
And dedication.
Dedication.
Which is connected there.
Yeah, that connection of the 7 to the 1, yeah. All about dedication and rededication.
Which is at Hanukkah.
Is that
Hanukkah means dedication or rededication. And how many days is Hanukkah?
8.
8, right?
7 plus 1.
Why? Because they took the 7 plus 1, and Hanukkah, they dedicate the temple, and they looked at Solomon, of course, and they said, all right, we're going to do it like Solomon,
Mm-hmm.
because the Lord showed up with fire from heaven.
Right. Even if we're a little late,
Right.
because we were battling the Greeks.
Yeah,
It's a
I think-
delayed Sukkot, right?
Yeah, they were like, hey, we didn't get to do Sukkot. But more so, the dedication of the
Dedication
temple.
of the temple, right.
That was the big
Mm.
deal, right?
It's good, yeah. In this, I am connected again to Hanukkah, so that the intertestamental period there, of where this 8th day shows up again in the rededication. So let's jump to Yeshua. So we'll go to Matthew 17. That's right. Matthew 17. Verses 1 through 9. Can someone read that one for me?
After 6 days, Yeshua took with him Peter and Jacob and John his brother, and brings them up a high mountain by themselves. Now he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with Yeshua. Peter responded to Yeshua, Master, it's good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 Sukkot here, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah. While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and behold, a voice from out of the cloud saying, This is my son whom I love, with him I am well pleased, listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell face down, terrified. But Yeshua came and touched them. Get up, he said, stop being afraid. And lifting their eyes, they saw no one except Yeshua alone. As they were coming down from the mountain, Yeshua commanded them, saying, Do not tell anyone about this vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead.
Thank you. So what does this story, how does it relate and speak about Sukkot and the 8th day?
They asked Jesus if, for Yeshua, if they should build temporary shelters.
Yeah. So it makes me think that Peter was thinking of Sukkot. Like, it always seemed really strange to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why would he all of a sudden say, let's build tents for you guys? I was wondering this last time reading through it, is like, because he's seeing Yeshua and Elijah and Moses, this amazing thing, maybe he thinks of Sukkot. That's why he says this. He didn't know. He didn't know what to say, and so he said this. I think maybe it's one of the other Gospels that says he didn't know what to say, and so he just said something. Well, first thing that came to mind was Sukkot.
So do we know the timing of it?
I tried to figure that out because after 6 days, it backed up, and I couldn't figure out where they were and what time of year. Maybe some. I mean, I'm sure scholars may have figured it out, but I couldn't figure it. I don't think we know. I don't think we know after 6 days. But so I think that was interesting. Why would he think of Sukkot when this kind of wild and amazing things happening before him?
I don't know. I mean, yeah. Jesus has been with him, but then all of a sudden, Moses and Elijah show up, and the first thing he thinks of, well, let's build some Sukkots. That blows my mind.
Right.
It's definitely festive. I mean, he's thinking, let's party.
Right.
We have the glorified Yeshua King in our midst, so he's thinking, let's party.
And it was a temporary dwelling for those guys who came. So it wasn't like, I'm gonna build a altar to them.
Right.
I'm gonna do a temporary dwelling, because know how long they're staying.
Not where did they come from, why are they here, let's build them a Sukkot.
One thing to think about is where are they when this happens?
On a high mountain by themselves.
By themselves. Do you know what mountain? I don't know if it says it in this one. It doesn't say in this passage.
It doesn't say in
Any of the
passage.
Okay. There's speculation that it's Mount Hermon, right?
The debate is Hermon and Tabor,
Okay.
but actually Heiser weighs in real strongly that it's Hermon.
That's what I was thinking of, is that.
They called them that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Michael Heiser
Says a high mountain.
when he talks about, that Tom was talking about last week, the unseen realm, is that Mount Hermon was related to a lot of those spiritual beings coming down. And I don't remember the exact details, so maybe you can explain that a little.
Yeah, in the book of Enoch, that's where Enoch talks about how the sons of God, the evil sons of God, came down, and from Genesis chapter 6. And we didn't talk about this actually, but eventually I will. We haven't got there yet. But basically, however you want to understand the fallen angels, or there are different ways to understand it, but basically that the evil came down there, and it's a high mountain, and we know throughout the ancient world that was this site of evil. And so this is, if he's at Hermon, it's very much this affront to the kingdom of darkness, that he's come and demonstrating his glory right at the peak of where the darkness would have been governing. So this is a governing declaration, and of course, what do we have but the Father himself speaking out of heaven?
Right.
This is my beloved Son. If you were at Yom Kippur, you heard my teaching. The beloved Son is this declaration of Yeshua as the greater son of David, right? So this is a kingly governmental declaration where the Father's saying, this is my Son, and he's transfigured in glory. I mean, it's a pretty dramatic moment.
Yes, for sure. And
like on so many levels.
Well, and in Matthew 16, they're at Caesarea Philippi, this place where all these monuments to these other gods are. And it's where Shimon Kefa, Peter, has this revelation that Yeshua is the Messiah. And so he's got this context when they get to then this Mount of Transfiguration scene. He's already got this context of you are the God above, you're the authority above all other authorities.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting too is that if they're on Hermon, and this is the place where the evil sons of God came down to establish their rule on the earth, that the Father says, this is my beloved Son, who I will please. So it's a declaration not only of who he is, but it's that he is better and therefore more powerful than any of these other sons of God.
And that connects back to what you're saying, Exodus.
Yes.
We had this son of Ra, Pharaoh, versus Israel, who were called his firstborn son.
Right.
And so you had this
that's good.
Battle that the Lord, of course, wins.
Right.
There as well.
Absolutely. And so, if Peter's versed as many of them in Enoch, right? As many people many Jews in the first century may have been. So he may have been thinking of all these things, and then God comes down and just shows his mighty power on this place, especially after leaving Caesarea Philippi. He's like, the redemption of the world is coming. If you're a Jew in the first century and you think of the redemption of the world, you think of Sukkot. So in that context, it makes sense that he's like, this is Sukkot happening, that's why they brought, right? Even later they have, Palm Sunday. They're thinking of Sukkot. Those are lulavs, right? They're thinking, because even though it's in the spring, it's like the king is coming to the temple, right? God is coming, and so they're like, it's like it's interesting. They see the signs in it, and yet they're less religious about the timing.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, he's here, so let's do it. You know, whether it's in December because God gave him victory over the Greeks, or if it's whenever this happened on the mountain, or it's in the spring, like, hey, the king's coming, let's celebrate. It's Sukkot. So in that context, his response makes way more sense, but it never made sense to me before in life out of these different, without the unseen realm sort of context and without the Jewish sort of context. So, but again, it's about that redemption. But then at the end, Yeshua says, commanded them, do not tell anyone about this vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead. So though he's like, this is a first fruits of my defeat of the enemy, it's not time yet. So as we end today, let's jump quickly to Revelation 21 to see, to just read and see the fulfillment of the 8th day. I'll read it too. Then I saw the new heaven and the new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. I also saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. I also heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the dwelling of God is among men, and he shall tabernacle among them. They shall be his people, and God himself shall be among them and be their God. He shall wipe away every tear from their eyes, and the death shall be no more. Nor shall there be mourning or crying or pain or any longer, for the former things have passed away. And now the one seated upon the throne said, behold, I am making all things new. And write these things, and he said, write, for these words are trustworthy and true. Then just verse 7 real quick. And the one who overcomes shall inherit these things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son. Just quickly for what stood out to me in this. So this is the 8th day, right? Push the fall feast, the fall Moedim, are symbols of the end times, how we transition into the age to come. The 8th day is likely after millennial and the establishment of the new heavens and the new earth. But even in this description of it, what stands out to me is that God wants a family. I thought of you when I read that. Because he says, comes down like a bride adorned for her wedding. The bride, the wife, the bride. And then at the end, I will be his God and he will be my son. God wants a family. This is all about, like you said, growing and gathering the family. And so all of this, all of the Moedim, all the story, all of the works of God